Hello everybody, welcome back. If I have scheduled this correctly, this video should be coming out on April 5th, Japan time, because honestly, whatever time zone I'm in is the correct time zone. You all have to deal with it. But it's April 5th. Why am I doing a video specifically for April 5th? It is because April 5th is the 50th anniversary of Stephen King's, Carrie. Now, so I thought, because 50th anniversary, it's a big day, I thought I would do a video about it. And you know what's interesting? I could have sworn that I had read this book before. I remember seeing it when I was a kid, when I was probably far too young to be reading Carrie, honestly. And in my head, I'm like, oh yeah, of course I've read Carrie. Who hasn't read Carrie? It's Stephen King's first published novel. It really set him going for his entire career. It's one of the most famous books that he's written in his entire time as a writer. Of course I read Carrie. And so I pulled it down on Kindle and I started to read it, and by God, I didn't recognize anything, with the exception of the very last scene between Carrie and her mom. For some reason, I knew kind of how that went. But yeah, if I did read Carrie, then it's right in the memory hole, because I couldn't remember a thing, which is great. This is sometimes something that we want, right? You've read a book, and I don't know about you, but sometimes I've wished that I could forget that book so that I could read it and enjoy it all over again. And apparently that is what my helpful brain has done with Carrie. So let's talk a little bit about Carrie. Well, the first thing I can really say about this book is that you can see sort of how many Stephen King things, I guess, were present right from the beginning. I have read a lot of Stephen King novels. I promise you I have. And there's a lot of stuff in the book that really you can kind of see that's setting his pattern as a writer going forward. Things like this sort of omniscient point of view where he's able to jump from person to person and kind of give you these different perspectives on what's going on in the story. His use of sort of in-universe articles or reports or sort of third-party points of view that kind of add a little bit more context to the work that he's writing. And of course, King is an excellent creator of suspense. So one of the things as you're reading Carrie that you know from right from the beginning is you very, very soon learn that this story will end badly. He even tells us at one point, Carrie's mom's going to die, right? Tells us very early on in the book, Carrie's mom's going to die. And you know really early that this will end in tragedy. And whether it is a tragedy is something we can discuss later, maybe, but it's going to end badly. And yet, as the book goes on, as we see, our title character, Carrie, who at the very beginning of the book is in her first scene, she is literally nonverbal. She makes weird noises and such as she cowers from the other girls in the gym shower. She is a heavy girl. She's got acne. She's got no color hair. She is almost bestial when we first see her, and she's being taunted by these girls as Carrie is having her very first period, which she was terribly unprepared for because her mother is a religious maniac who associates anything connected with sex with evil and sin. And as far as her mom is concerned, menstruation is a sign of corruption, and it is a curse. So yeah, Carrie doesn't come from a good place. But as the book goes on and we start to get a little view into her head and a little understanding of her history, we kind of start to feel bad for Carrie, right? When we first see into her head, Carrie has a lot of hateful thoughts about these other girls, but it's kind of deserved. These other girls are horrible. They are terrible people, and they're very, very mean to her. But our first introduction to her is anger and hate. But as the book goes on, as things kind of change for her, as the popular guy invites her to the prom, earnestly and honestly, insofar as we can tell, she starts to be better. She stands up to her mom. She's a little more outgoing, more talkative. She makes jokes and such. And then, of course, is the great tragedy of being crowned king and queen of the prom and the pig's blood being dropped on her, and then everybody dies. Because that's how the story has to go. So, yeah, it's interesting to see that arc. But again, knowing from the very beginning of the book that you see her trying. You see her making an effort to become maybe a better or nicer or kinder person. But at the back of your head, you know it's going to end badly. And that is kind of why I use the word tragedy. I mean, classically speaking, it's not a tragedy in the classic Greek sense. But at the same time, when you do go to see a tragedy, whether it's Oedipus Rex or Death of a Salesman, you kind of know from the outset that it's going to end badly. And part of the catharsis of it all, as it were, is to see that moment when what you knew was coming actually happens, right? When you knew that things are going to go badly for Carrie, and then they actually do. There's that moment of, oh, okay, it's this release of feeling and emotion. And then you just get to watch as all hell breaks loose. It's great. I love it. The other thing I liked is that, as much as Carrie is sort of the butt of everyone's jokes, King has created a fairly heterogeneous group of characters. Sure, let's use that word. Not everybody is evil to Carrie, right? There's a small group of people who are. One of them being a girl named Chris, who that breaks my heart that has to be her name, but she is. She is awful. She is terrible, and her boyfriend is a certified lunatic. But there are other people, right? There's the gym teacher who stands up for her against the mean girls. The gym teacher says, basically, you don't know what she's been through. You don't know. Do you think anything that you've been doing is good? There's the principal, right? When this Chris girl, alpha ringleader girl's father comes, and he pulls I'm a big lawyer. I could put you out of a job. The principal basically says, you know what? No, I'm not bending over for this. The school has the responsibility to protect all of its students. That includes your daughter. That includes Carrie. And if you try to go after us, then we're going to have to go after your daughter for the awful things that she's done as well. And then there's this girl, Sue, who was one of the mean girls, but then kind of turns it around. She realizes that she was being terrible, and it's actually her idea for her boyfriend to invite Carrie to the prom. So there are a variety of people, there are a variety of levels of good and awful and somewhat indifferent in the book. So again, this is one of the things that King is really, really good at, is these large casts of characters where you can see that everybody has a very specific point of view on what's happening in the story. Speaking of points of view, as I mentioned before, there are these interludes between chapters which tell us a little bit about what happened after the events of Carrie, after the events of Carrie's explosion at the prom and the destruction of the town. These are some committee reports, they are depositions, they are excerpts from a couple of books, including a memoir written by Sue about what happened to her, because a lot of people blamed her for what happened. And I've heard I've heard one explanation that King wrote those because the story as it was pretty short, and he needed more word count really to get it up to novel size. And it is short. I read this in an afternoon. This is not a long book. So I have heard that, and that makes sense. However, the reason why I think it works really well is, number one, it allows King to do what I was just talking about before, which is to give us that sense of impending doom, right? We know that whatever happens to Carrie results in congressional hearings, multiple books being published, the destruction of not just the town, but the reputations of various people. There are a lot of things, a lot of repercussions from what happens to Carrie, and it gives it a very, very real feeling, right? This is a world. This isn't just one tiny town in Maine where something weird happens, which is kind of King's MO. It is a whole world that is affected by what Carrie does to her classmates and to her town. So I really like those interludes. Those are very, very good. And I think overall it's a really good book. I think it's King says in his introduction that part of when he was writing this, he says he recalled, or he says he was haunted by the ghosts of two girls that he knew when he was a kid, who were sort of the origin story for Carrie. One was the very poor girl who always wore the same clothes to school because her parents really couldn't afford more clothes. And then in Christmas got a new set of clothes and came in looking really happy, like, hey, I've got new clothes, but everyone made fun of her anyway. And the other was a girl that he knew who came from a very, very religious household, that was, religious in a very creepy way. And those two girls kind of combined in his head to become Carrie. And he says, at the end of his introduction, he says he kind of wishes that those girls had lived to see this book. He doesn't know how they might have reacted, if they might have cheered Carrie on for committing mass murder or what, but he does kind of say that, in a sense, those two real people are very much at the in the back of his mind as he's writing. And I think anybody who reads this book who has ever been bullied or ostracized or made fun of can certainly, I think, relate in a sense. I can imagine if you've ever been on the receiving end of mean girl taunts or other types of bullying, I'm sure your mind has at some point gone to the I'll show them all place, right? That it often does. But we don't have the power to do that, but Carrie, of course, does. And I think for everyone who's been bullied, I think there's a glimmer of familiarity to that. Like, if I could, this is what I would do. But then when King is describing what Carrie does, not just to her bullies, but to people who had nothing to do with her, right? The whole town, she blows up gas stations, she's pulling down electrical lines. People who had nothing to do with Carrie die in horrible ways. And in the end, as they say, in the end, the town itself pretty much dies. Nobody wants to stay there. Nobody wants to rebuild. It's not like a natural disaster where people start putting up buildings again. And that's a lot. That is extreme. I do feel bad for Carrie having gone through what she's gone through, but destroying an entire town, it's a wee bit disproportionate. Let's call it that. And that really led me to thinking at the end, what is this book about? I'm an English teacher. I can't not do this. It is, of course, about a telekinetic girl who gets revenge on her bullies. Sure. But what is it, capital A, about, right? I like to say that all art is basically a statement from the artist. And that statement is, life is like this. And you can substitute life for other stuff if you want. Love is like this. Anger is like this. Hatred is like this. Whatever you want. Parenting is like this. But all art, music, painting, sculpture, games, novels, short stories, poems, life is like this. And so I started to ask myself, what is King saying life is like in this book? And a lot of it comes down to hate. This is a book about hating people and what hate does to you. The girls at the beginning of the book who are making fun of Carrie, who are throwing tampons at her, hate Carrie just because she is different. She is weird. She has a bizarre mother. Her mother hates her because Carrie is the product, we learn that Carrie is the product of a rape, that her husband basically raped her. Carrie's the product of that. And she, Carrie's mom was not really sex positive at all to begin with, but her retreat, her descent into this hyper-fanatical religious life led her to believe that anything associated with sex was sinful. And of course, what's one of the things associated with sex is a child. And she has hated Carrie from the moment Carrie was born, partly because of how Carrie was brought into the world, but as part of, in her last scene, she reveals that she actually enjoyed having sex. And to her, that is unacceptable. And every time she sees Carrie, she's reminded of that. So her mom hates Carrie. And of course, Carrie hates everyone. Like I said, some of the first scenes we get, the first glimpses we get inside her mind are glimpses of hate. She's like, I hate them all. And we can understand why she hates them all. Because she didn't deserve to be treated the way that she is. So, yeah, the book is about hate. So what is King saying about hate and what it does to us? I think the easy answer is that hate is destructive. Hate is always destructive. Hate destroys in this book, in a very, very literal sense. Hate is destructive. It tears down an entire town. But in a more sort of real world sense, hate destroys who we are. It destroys our relationships. It destroys any happiness that we could have had. If Carrie's mom had just sort of, I hate to use the word loosened up a bit. It's not the right word that I want. But if she had let go of her hate, she might have found some sort of love with her daughter. And she might have grown up with a daughter that she loves instead of a daughter that she locks in the closet every time she mouths off to her. If the girls at school had just said, well, yeah, Carrie is different, but we don't know what her life is like. And you know what? I think maybe throwing tampons at her during her first menstruation probably isn't going to help. Things would have been better. Everybody who hates, and of course Carrie, it's a big ask for Carrie, I know, but if Carrie had been able to let go of her hate, hundreds of people would have lived and a town would not have been destroyed. And there are people who let go of their hate. Sue Snell is able to stop being one of the mean girls. She realizes how awful she's been, and she lives. I don't know if that's necessarily intentional, but it seems that, like in the very last scene that Carrie and Sue have together, Carrie searches through Sue's mind and discovers that Sue doesn't really hate her. That she was just being, she was young and she was stupid and she was mean, but there was no hate and no malice. So yeah, I think the best I could do now is that King is telling us that hate is destructive. And he doesn't offer a solution for this. Some writers do. Some writers will say, hate is destructive, and so here's what you should do and how you should deal with it. King does not offer a solution because King is a horror writer. King is not a therapist. He's not a self-help book. He is a horror writer. I think he wants us to draw our own conclusions about what the consequences of hate are. And for me, reading Carrie, the consequences of hate, like I said, are utter destruction. That if you give in to hate, if you allow hate to dictate your actions, then nothing good comes of it. And I know this is not a brilliantly original idea, but it's what I got. So if you have any thoughts on what Carrie is, capital A, about, if anything, feel free to chime in. I would love to hear what your thoughts are as well. And if you have ever thought of, destroying an entire town with your mind, I get it. I've been there. We've all been there. Glad that you didn't. That's pretty good. And if there's anything else that you read, if you read Carrie and you have any other thoughts about the book, I would love to hear them from you as well. I know I didn't get everything I could have gotten because I don't want these videos to go on for ages and ages and ages. I'm not ContraPoints. But if you've got any other thoughts, I would love to hear them. Maybe we can do another video another time. So, thank you very much for sticking around. Happy 50th anniversary to Carrie. Mr. King, if you're watching this, and why wouldn't you be watching this? Good job. Keep up the good work. You're going places. And that's about it. Thank you all very much, and I will see you in the next video.